9th of December 2016, in Newtown, Oduduwa area, Ondo State, a 12-year-old boy was found buried in between two adjacent walls. This strange story led to so much question as to how the boy got in there, who he was, and how long he spent trapped in those walls. I'm going to cover up the whole story as to what actually happened to this boy and how he got into those walls. So kindly stay tuned as we dive into it. The strange story of the boy started 3 days ago when the inhabitants of this area began complaining of hearing noises coming from a wall, and this particular wall was said to separate two different compounds, and due to this two wall separation demarcating the two compounds, a little gap was formed in between them. The first wall was actually a series of shops, while the second wall, which was built in the form of a fence, demarcated this series of shops from a residential apartment. The residents living in this apartment began complaining of hearing strange noises coming from the wall 3 days ago before the boy was actually found. And according to some reports, some even complained that the voice repeated whatever thing they said. So most likely they thought it was a prank and didn't pay much attention to it at the first place. But eventually, the voice continues. At times, it will come in the form of someone singing strange songs, and also at times, it will come in the form of someone saying strange words. And one of the residents living in this area complained of hearing this voice saying strange words like this: "I am Judas Iscariot. I killed Jesus. Bring the Gary. Help me." Those were the creepy words they never complained of hearing coming from this world. Well, they ignored it and thought it was coming from the neighboring compound sharing the demarcation with them. On the second day, this strange noises coming from the wall continued, but this time, the noise was more weak and feeble than the previous day's one. Maybe probably because whoever that might be in that wall was losing energy. So this time, the residents of this environment couldn't tolerate it anymore. So the residents of one of these compounds confronted the neighboring compounds, only for them to find out that they had nothing to do with these strange noises coming from the wall. This was absolutely strange, and some of them began to think that it was spiritual. Even some of the residents began making plans of leaving the area because they have never encountered such before. At the first place, they must have thought that it was a joke, hearing these noises, repeating whatever thing they said. But when this voice went as far as saying creepy and scary words, even at night when everyone was supposed to be asleep, they began suspecting that it was something extraordinary. On the third day, which happens to be the 9th of December, was the day the individuals living in this environment decided to take actions over the noise coming from the wall. They brought a ladder and climbed the fence because there was actually a tiny space formed in between the two walls of the compounds. On climbing the walls and searching through the gaps, they discovered that someone was stuck in the gap. And without any hesitation, they began doing something as to get this person out as soon as possible. According to some reports, it was said that the police were being called. But from the other side of the story, it was said that a man living in one of these compounds began breaking the walls immediately. Whatever the case may be, the walls were broken down, and lo and behold, a skinny looking and emaciated 12-year-old boy was found in the walls. Thankfully, the boy was alive. He was brought out from those walls and washed with water. But even at that, the question that gets lingering through people's mind was, how did he get into those walls? Because the tiny space between these two walls separating these two compounds was so small as to fit a child of that size, and these were the possible answers to that questions coming from different sources. Well, according to the first source as to how this boy got trapped between these walls, it was claimed that the boy was a wizard who ended up trapped between these walls while flying around in the form of a bird or any nocturnal creatures like an owl or probably a bat. Some claim that maybe he was flying around in the form of these creatures, and then he mistakenly got hit by a tree branch, which made him fall into the gap, transformed back into a human being, and then got trapped there because of the tight gap between these two different walls. Well, a good number of people believe this because why wouldn't they? African men are so addicted to all these spiritual stories, and this narration seems to make a clear sense as to why the boy ended up there. But not everyone believes on all these spiritual and wizard stories, and in respect to this came the speculation of the second source as to how the boy got trapped between those walls. The second source claimed that the landlord of one of these compounds built the wall over the boy on purpose, maybe for sacrificial or ritual reasons. And as of that time, it was claimed that the landlord took to the seas and ran away when he learned that the police were looking for him for interrogations over this case. But most individuals living in that area claimed that that was not possible because those walls were built over 20 years ago. And it makes sense because there is probably no way someone could be trapped in the air for 20 years and still remains alive. So actually this source didn't give a clear reason as to why the boy was there. I guess you might be thinking that there must be a clear reason, free from all these spiritual, ritual and traditional beliefs. Well, it wasn't long after all these incidents that Chinese television visited the area and came up with a much more reasonable and acceptable speculation. So 2 weeks after the incidents, Chinese television visited the area and came up with a much more better explanation as to how the boy ended up trapped between those walls. According to them, the 12-year-old boy who was identified as Abdurrabeni was having mental issues. Of course, these were some of the reports they got from the folks living around here, because the boy who was said to be living with his grandmother has evacuated the area before Channel Television visited here. It was said that the 12-year-old Benny was living with his grandmother, who handed him to a prophetess living around that area for deliverance. And when this prophetess was interviewed, she said that during the day of the boy's disappearance, she released the 12-year-old baby to his grandmother, who claims that she wants to take him to a different deliverance center for deliverance. And according to this prophetess, the boy himself was against his grandmother taking him to this center for deliverance. And on the attempt of preventing his grandmother from taking him to this center, the little boy escaped and somehow ended up trying to hide himself between these two walls, which finally led to him getting trapped for 3 days between these two walls. When Chinese television visited Benny's grandmother's house, it was claimed that she wasn't around because maybe she must have left the area before they did visited her. But locals living around the area claimed that the boy finally reunited with his grandmother after he was found 3 days later. And judging from this source from Chinese television, it makes clear sense because if we go back to the way these walls were built, we will understand that there was actually a wall which was directly parallel to another wall surrounding a compound. So in between these two walls, there was a tiny space or gap, which probably looked good enough for a hideout for kids at that age. And so I believe that maybe the 12-year-old Benny, while intent on running away from his grandmother to prevent her from taking him to that deliverance center, must have found himself there and got the wrong impression of hiding there. And maybe on the process of doing so, he got stuck and wasn't able to come back again for complete 3 days before he was found. If you believe this story actually makes sense, let me know on the comment section below.